How to heat prep, that is the question. Different approaches depending on what time, budget, etc. you have open to you. I've done a few different ways of heat prepping now. I did, like 2019, I basically heat prepped in a lab near me. A mix of bike and run in the lab and kind of sitting in the lab post bike and run. I think I ended up doing about 10 sessions before I went out to Kona, and I did that over like a two to 3 week period, I think it was, and it was very much I think like my first sort of 4 or 5 sessions were very easy. Like we had it quite hot and quite humid, but kept intensity massively down, basically because I couldn't really cycle more than like 100 watts and that. Because I think initially when you try and do it, your whole body is like, what are you doing to me? By the time I got to like the last sort of 5 sessions, was actually managing to add a bit of intensity. So I think that's one way you can do it if you've got access to like a proper heat chamber that you can get the heat and humidity up. The year before, I did it on a bit of a like DIY basis of saunas and hot baths at home. Also worked reasonably well. So it'd be do something like do a session, get in a hot bath for like 20 minutes, or do a swim session, get in the sauna for like 20-30 minutes. So I think again you can get some quite good heat adaptation from that, as well as doing like hot turbos. This year obviously I've just come out to a basically hot humid sauna with humidity. So I think that's the other way of doing it, of actually having a decent amount of time so that you can have those like easy sessions initially, do your intensity as well, and have the time to recover. Because I think one of the things that I think some people kind of make the mistake of going to Kona like maybe 10 days out, think, oh god, I've got to get heat acclimatized, try and go too hard and just sort of wipe themselves out from the heat. And I've noticed it with like basically any time I've done a session out here, like the recovery when you've done a session in the heat is like, you need much more recovery basically, like, and again probably individual, so a bit of that, but I think for most people like the heat just takes a lot more out of you. Particularly out here, it's been like real feel 39-40 degrees, humidity at like 80-90% humidity, like it's pretty toasty. So I think that's one option, like having a good like 2-3 weeks of being out in the heat somewhere. You can also do a bit of a mix of like active and passive kind of heat prep. So again, I think like the kind of basic rule that I've heard, again this is not based on like proper science, this is what I've picked up from like various people, is trying to get about 10 sessions in before you're going somewhere hot, and doing a mix of that kind of active and passive. So you want to kind of alternate and do like passive, again can be like sitting in a hot bath or just sitting in a sauna post a session. Active is actually trying to do a hot turbo session. You want to try and be sensible with it as well. So if you've got like 2 sessions in a day, you don't want to do like your heat session as your first session and then be trying to do your second session later, because you're probably going to be pretty fucked from doing the heat session. My main tips with it would be kind of work out what time you've got available. If you've got the time to get a sauna in like every day, you can probably do it in like a 10-day block. If you can't quite do that because you're trying to like sauna at the swimming pool, or you're trying to hot bath, or you know whatever it is, and you have to spread it out over like 2.5 weeks, again that's fine, but you probably want to do like day on day off of heat stuff. And then the other tip around it would be just be very mindful of how much extra sort of recovery and how much more drained you'll feel from it. So again, it's like potentially worth adjusting your training a bit around that initial few sessions. Adjust your intensity to what environment you're in. So like, yeah, out here, for example, like probably definitely the first week, I basically adjusted what I was aiming for kind of power wise, because my heart rate was obviously much higher from the heat. I think if you're doing it in a lab, again, you can be quite controlled with it, or even if you're doing it like in your garage on the turbo. But it's being mindful that those first few sessions you probably want to dial back the intensity, so you're not basically take into account that it's like going to altitude, like it's going to have an impact on what power you can put out, so don't get super depressed by that. I think it's almost making sure you have clear strategy around it, so like you know what your active sessions are, you know what your passive sessions are, and you're quite kind of defined about how you're doing it and what your expectations are from it. I think rather than just trying to be like, oh, I need to get some heat prep in and panic and try and like do everything in one and then basically just put yourself in a big hole. So when I was doing the heat sessions in the lab, we would often start without the fan and then put the fan on. Something else that is it's a good point about the fan, because what I found, again, I don't know if this is the same for like everyone, I'd assume it would be similar, but if you start getting your core temperature up, it will probably stay there, and the fan will you don't generally cool down, but your perception of how hot you are is way different. Again, like something to bear in mind, if you're trying to do your heat sessions in like your garage, you could like do maybe 20 minutes without your fan to get hot, but then it's not I think some people have in their head, oh, if I put the fan on, I'm wimping out and I'm losing the benefit of it. Like, you don't lose that benefit, you're still hot, as long as you're still kind of keeping that core temperature up, unless you suddenly stop pedaling, like your core temp's probably still going to be up. So yeah, fan definitely is key, because otherwise I think you get about 45 minutes in and you're like, oh, I can't do this anymore. I think there's something about moving through the air that can feel more cooling than just a fan, but I think actually for me a lot of that is how my mental state is. Like if I'm feeling quite good doesn't really matter, whereas if I'm feeling bad, I'm probably going to feel pretty bad, whatever. And I think you can definitely see with how hot you're getting, because I think there's like certain points when it starts getting like really uncomfortable versus being sort of like a bit uncomfortable but tolerable. I think the only other thing I'd say on heat prep is also experiment a bit with, again, what makes you feel best with, say, things like ice. Like there's like obviously different places you can put ice, hold ice. I think like some of the best places to try and get it are like kind of wrists, so like hold it in your hands, like rub it on your wrists a bit, getting it sort of down your neck. I always get it down my tri-suit, like down the front, because your big arteries here, / veins or arteries, whatever they are, might be both. If you can get those cooled down a bit, that makes a big difference. So it's, yeah, also working out what makes you feel like you're cooling down a bit.